Alright, I'm going to continue my evaluation just for the heck of it. I'm going to pull this seal out because I know it's bad. And once I get the seal out, I'm going to reinsert the shaft and see how much play there is in this bushing. I can't get that seal out without a seal puller or something sharper that I can tap in there to get underneath that lip. Anyways, I reinserted the shaft, and I can rock it back and forth this much back here, but this is where it's supported by the bearing that's gone. The actual end play up here is not bad at all, considering it might have been serviceable if it wasn't for the fact that this bearing is completely junk. Well, let's see how the lever shaft is in these bushings. There's two bushings on this side. This is supported by bushings in the front and the back, as opposed to this is the lever shaft supported by bushings in the front and the back, as opposed to the gear shaft, which is supported by the bearing and a bushing. And again, minimal amount of play in this bushing. Get around on the other side, check the outer bushing. And that's really good, nice and tight. Maybe spoke too soon. Again, small amount of play. Nothing to get all in a tear about. And then of course, the other issue on this is that spot there on that pin. It looks pretty flat from this angle, but if you look down from the top, it doesn't look as bad. As a matter of fact, it almost looks like, looking at it real close there, it almost looks like there was a damage on this and that it may have been welded up and reground, because it's got kind of an odd look to it. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what happened, if that's already been repaired. And the last test I'm going to make is I'm going to reinsert this shaft, this worm gear, into the pedestal and see how much play there is. Alright, with the steering column reinserted, you can see there's quite a few thousandths of play in there. But again, for the age of the machine, that's nothing. So again, I think this had some work done at some point. But right now I'm pretty much at a standstill until I figure out what I'm going to do about this bearing situation. Probably should have marked these arms to keep track of which one goes on which side. I think they're identical except for the fact that they've been indexed, so it would have been nice to keep them straight. But I'm almost positive this is the one that I took off last. So that would be the one that goes on this side. And then this is the one I took off first, I think. Well, it's the least of my worries. Alright, so the other big damage, of course, to this whole steering gear, besides that bearing, is of course what makes it power steering, which I had discovered when I took this apart yesterday. So if I take this piece out now, now, I'm going to clean it up for a second. Alright, so the deal with this is this piece snapped off right from here. It doesn't want to really go together now because I think this got damaged when it was broken and the piston was moving in and out. You see there's a big gall right there on this part. Alright, well, I tapped it in with the hammer and it actually goes in. And it still work. As far as the fit, I mean, obviously it's not going to work with the crack in it. My point being, I might be able to save this by having a weld. Having this welded. Of course, I guess the proper way to have this done would be to grind a groove in here where the crack is and then go back and fill that back in with a weld. Would that work? Would that work? Let's see. It almost looks to me like there would be enough clearance in there. It almost looks like there'd be just enough clearance in there to allow for this to be welded. I mean, like I said, guy wants 250 bucks for this thing. You think I want to try welding it instead? You damn right I do. But it all goes back to the bearing. No bearing, no point. Yeah, I'd like to pull this cylinder apart. According to what I read, it talks about using a rubber mallet to bump it apart. So I'm wondering if this is just pressed in there and it's just a matter of pulling this cylinder out and then popping it out. Yeah, what I just did was I put this screwdriver through here and was grabbing and pushing like this on with both hands. Got to put the camera down to do it, but I actually got this to move out, so I guess that's how it comes out. Yeah, that's a piece of cake. That pulls right out. Basically, this O-ring is what makes it a tight fit, keeps it also sealed. So you could see why this would be why this may have been leaking into the steering box. This O-ring right here has got a big chunk missing out of it. So that O-ring's damaged. When I took it out, this little shred of O-ring was actually hanging off. So that O-ring's toast. And that definitely would cause your problem. And then as far as what seals it on the actual piston are two rings. They're in excellent shape, which is nice. Also the cylinder itself, excellent shape. Not all pitted, which is great considering that we know that the hydraulic fluid was not up to par on this thing. It's a little bit left over inside there, you can see it. It's disgusting, milky white, contaminated. Alright, calling it quits, and this might be the last video on this for a while, depending on how bad it goes with the bearing issue in the steering gear. Well, this morning I decided to do a little more searching for that bearing that I need to fix the steering box, and Bates Corporation out in Indiana, they've got a lot of parts for International Harvester, and on their website they list the manual steering box remanufactured for $1,450. So I thought, well, maybe I should give them a call. They also list the piston rack, brand new, for $450. So that little hunk of metal with the gear teeth on it there, that rack, 450 bucks. And the piston rod, which I don't need, for $250. So the rack, $450. I think I'm going to try and weld mine, or have it welded professionally, for a fraction of what that's going to cost me to buy. I did find that rack for $250 on another website, and then I even found the listing of a guy back in 2005 posted on the forum that he builds them for $150. Of course, with inflation, it'd probably be a little more, but point is, there are guys out there making those. But I figured I'd call them and ask whether or not they had the gear, the bearing, because if they're remanufacturing the boxes, you'd think they'd have the bearings. Well, I talked to a guy out there and he explained to me, no, they don't have a source for that bearing. What they're basically doing is they're taking, he said usually it takes about 3 defective boxes that they get in to make one good box. And he did say, even though it's not on the website, they've got a remanufactured, quote unquote, power steering box that he'd be willing to sell me for $1,550, so $100 more than the manual. And then there's a core charge of $350 on the manual. So obviously he's going to want all my parts from my old box back, because then they're going to use the good parts in my old box to make the next one. So I can't bring myself to spend $1,550 on this tractor. So I'm going to have to either hold out in the hopes of finding that bearing somewhere else, continue looking and searching, or I'm going to have to think about completely redoing the steering system on this tractor, which is an option. I just don't like the idea of doing that, only because it seems like a shame to take a 1958 350U that is one of the last ones that came off the production line and, you know, butcher it up so that I can make it a drivable work tractor. On the other hand, without a good steering box in it, it ain't much good. But maybe a collector would be willing to put the money into it. I don't know. And then the other option is I part it out. I mean, if I could get a fraction of what some of these places are looking for to get for these parts, I could make my money back, you know, times 3 or 4 easily. It takes some time to sell it all, but, and then, you know, scrap whatever's left. But I mean, I've got some good sheet metal. I've got a rebuilt head, you know, a good running engine. Transmission seems to work. Hydraulics work. And there's a lot of good parts on this tractor. Again, don't like the idea of that, only because I'm basically parting out a nice, unique serial number 58U. So, got some thinking to do. Here's a guy, Main Tractor Crossing. His name's Scott. Just got off the phone with him. He's parting out 350 utility, and he's also got 3 350s, 300Us. Those had manual steering, but I got off the phone with him, and he said he sold the complete steering systems off of all those tractors right away. That was like one of the first things to go. And he said that he thinks that all the way up to the 460U they use the same box. So that's the good thing about it, that I might be able to broaden my search. So I'm going to go onto the Case IH website and check and see if that same bearing shows up in the higher part numbers, higher model numbers.